Okay, so I'm going to show you how to use your patterns that you made on your fabric so that you can get an accurate um, size and everything based off of your pattern. Now, the most important thing before you start cutting anything, make sure that your patterns are correct. So, double check, triple check. I'm only giving you 1 yard of fabric. If you mess up, you're on your own. And you might be crying at the end of this because you spent all that time and it does not fit you. So make sure that your sleeve looks like this bell shape here. If you have a peak in the middle, you're not going to have a round sleeve. You're going to have a very oddly shaped sleeve. So you might need to go back and redo the sleeve if you don't have this nice curve going through it. Also, you should have half of the back and half of the front, and you should not have the exact same pattern for the front and the back of the shirt. The collar is going to look different. Um, the opening for the sleeves is a slightly different curve. So really be careful about assuming things. You want to make sure you're doing the right thing. And the right thing means that you carefully watch that video and carefully copy that shirt. Once you have your pattern, though, it's really fairly simple going forward. The first thing we need to do is we need to line it up just how our instructions on our pattern say. So I had you write down cut once on fold. So I have my pattern facing up so I can see it. Now, don't forget about the right versus the wrong side of fabric. So, for example, if you are going if you use fabric that has a pattern on it, mine doesn't have a right or wrong side. But if I was using a fabric that had a pattern on it, then I would definitely want to use um, have the fabric turned over so I'm looking at the wrong side. The wrong side of the fabric is the side that doesn't have the pattern on it. It's the inside of the shirt, right? And the reason I'm sticking with the inside of the shirt is because we're going to be making marks on this, and we want that to be on the interior of the shirt. So I have a little pastel here and some pins. I'm only going to need a few pins at first, because all I'm doing is pinning my pattern down through the fabric. It's on a fold, right? So pardon the bell. There's two pieces of fabric here. Um, it's folded, and this edge is actually on the fold, right? I'm going to take the pins and I'm going to put them in at pretty much every corner. You could put them in the middle too, but this is just to hold everything still while I'm working. So the fabric doesn't buckle, so that the pattern doesn't shift. We want it to be as close to the original as possible. So we've got to make sure that we're following our patterns. All right. I might have a student or two walk in to grab their project. But once I have this laid out, the next thing I'm going to do is, and I've got it pinned, I'm going to go ahead and use a pastel, and I'm going to lightly trace along my pattern. Remember, this should be on the wrong side of the pattern, so it should be on the part of the pattern, or on the fabric. It should be the part of the fabric that you're not going to see, because it's going to be on the inside of the shirt. Once I have that drawn in, I can take out my pins. Being careful not to shift my fabric around. Keep track of your pins. And I am going to now pick up my pattern. And I'm going to go around with the pins, and I'm going to make sure the pattern is pinned, or sorry, the fabric is pinned so that it doesn't move around and shift while I'm cutting. When you're doing this part, you want to make sure that you pin not just at the corners, but also towards the edge. I'm recording, so please be quiet when you're grabbing your project. Got a pin over here. You really don't want the fabric to come loose while we're working, while we're cutting. Have a good weekend. Alright, so now that that's in place, now I can take my scissors and fabric shears and I can cut on the inside of the line that was drawn. Right, so that means the inside of that line, I'm going to carefully cut. Now you'll notice on the shears that there's a fatter side and a skinnier side. You want the skinnier side towards the bottom. Don't use the shears upside down. It'll be harder to cut. This is the spot I should have the pin. You can see I don't really need a lot of pins. Just enough to kind of keep everything in place while I'm working. Make sure that you are cutting along that line as accurately as possible. One thing I forgot to mention about your pattern is that hopefully you, before you started cutting this fabric, you thought about seam allowance. You should have a seam allowance everywhere but where that fold is. Where do you line it up on the fold? If you don't have a seam allowance, you might find that it'll be substantially smaller than you expected it to be. So I've cut out my piece of fabric now, and if I undo this, take all the pins out. I'm recording right now, so make sure that you are quiet when you're grabbing your project. So I am going to open it up, and you can see that it is in the shape of a shirt, right? Part of a shirt anyways. This is the back of the shirt. Always keep track of where you are on the shirt and which side is which too. So this part right here, I'm going to make sure I label it and keep it somewhere where I don't forget that this is the back of the shirt, as it will be annoying for you later if you put things in the wrong spot. So now that I've got that in place, I've already traced this one, already done the cut and everything on it. But I did want to show you before I go and continue on this. You will notice that it is not on a fold. It says cut to, and it says cut to, and it doesn't say cut on a fold. So you are not cutting on a fold. However, that doesn't mean that you can't fold the fabric and cut both out at the same time with the fabric pinned together. You're just not cutting it on a fold like you are the front of the shirt and the back of the shirt. So keep that in mind when you're working, that the sleeves are going to be cut out, not on a fold. They'll be disconnected because there's two sleeves, right? And as you're working, to just remember to keep track of which one is which. You can pin like a piece of paper or something to it that says back of shirt, and keep it aside for the next step. Once you have finished cutting everything out, then you will be ready to start sewing it together. So, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. You can see on the other side, I currently have the fabric folded again, and I will be cutting. Hold on a second, let me get these out of the way. I will be cutting this over here. It's really important that you make sure the pattern is facing the right way. By right way, I mean you should see what's written on the pattern. Don't flip it over, especially if you're working on a fabric that has a wrong and a right side, because you're going to end up with the pattern on the outside and on one side, and the pattern on the inside on the other side. So I'm just going to keep cutting these out, and once I'm done with all of them, then I can start sewing them. So hopefully you got what you needed from this, and by the end of it, you will have fabric copies of your patterns. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you learned something.